Today I just want to briefly counter some of the points I made in the video about Mari being Asuka's mother, for the sake of fairness, as that video was a bit too committed to supporting the idea. We'll go through two scenes from 2.22 and from 3+1, well, the preview of course, and see why they make the theory less likely. But before that, a brief mention to what was said in favor of it. Asuka and Mari both share strong physical similarities, the cat-like features, and are able to pilot Unit 2 and enter Beast Mode. This suggests a potential genetic link, kind of like with Shinji and Rei. But is that necessary? Of course not, as those similarities could simply stem from a prolonged exposure to Unit 2, as Mari is very likely to be its first pilot. I then brought up the manga chapter showing Mari as a 16-year-old in 1998, which would make it possible for her to give birth to Asuka in 2000. Yet, as she is just about to move to England from Japan, and is shown to have a crush on Yui, the likelihood that she found a partner, got pregnant, and gave birth, all within 2 years, is extremely low. Lastly, I talked about the names and their meaning, with Mari being named after the Virgin Mary and as such quite likely to be a young mother, as was the case with Mary, who gives birth to Jesus at the age of 14. In support of this, also the fact that, kind of like Jesus, Asuka is now half human and half angel. I'm sorry for this. But there is plenty of Marys in the writings, and the name could easily reference Mary Magdalene, or it could simply tie together Mari, Asuka and Rei to the three Marys, who are a recurring trio of Marys who follow Jesus, who in this case would be Shinji. Not that I like this idea. For what concerns the meaning of Asuka's name, Perfume of Tomorrow, I pointed out how it functioned as a metaphor for good future, but with an olfactive spin, which makes sense as Mari is shown to have a very pronounced sense of smell. So, a kid associated with the future is common enough, but the smell perfume part makes the association even more Mari specific. But can we really use this as a proof in favor of the idea? It's a bit much. There is a second meaning to Asuka's name, but I will talk about it in the conclusion. Let's move on to the two sequences now. First one in 2.22, when Mari enters the second unit. As we can see, she expresses a positive judgment of the smell inside the unit, but shows no sign whatsoever of knowing the pilot. I'm not saying that she has to know Asuka from a smell, but you would think that she'd know what her daughter is doing with her life, and that she's now the pilot of Unit 2, and has been for a while. In fact, being that she's even able to infiltrate Nerve and steal an Eva, learning the identity of the pilot should have been pretty easy, even if an effort was made to keep her in the dark. On to the second scene, end of the preview to 3+1. So, Mari expresses very intensely her determination to find Shinji. But surely, if she was Asuka's mother, she would, if not prioritize, at least mention Asuka in the same sentence as Shinji. Does it make sense for her to be more worried about him than about Asuka? Well, one could argue that this one is wrong no matter what, as Mari should be more worried about somebody she has spent 14 years with than for somebody she talked to for 2 minutes. But you know how it goes in Evangelion. The excuse that she thinks Asuka can manage on her own while Shinji cannot holds only until you realize that during the ending of 3.33, Mari asks Shinji to help Asuka, when it would have made perfect sense for her not to talk about her. So when it doesn't make sense, she thinks of Asuka, and when it does, she doesn't? Seems right. All of this would be easily solved by adding a single word to Mari's line. That it wasn't done may suggest that there isn't an intention to expand on their relationship. Who knows, maybe they were able to talk and Asuka told her that Shinji wasn't doing well, so let's say that we're gonna have to suspend judgment on this one, for now. But there is a way to explain the inconsistencies. Remember that in the original series Asuka's mother, Soryu Kyoko Zeppelin, as a result of a test in Unit 2, got her soul split in half. The motherly side stuck inside the unit, and outside of it a part of her that could not recognize Asuka as her own daughter. Now let's reinterpret it with Mari being the test pilot of Unit 2, and we can potentially assume that she entered Unit 2 as a 20-something-year-old mother of Asuka, was absorbed or whatever, and when she got out, she was back to being 16 and simply became unable to recognize Asuka as her daughter. Kind of like Yoko, but at the same time she retained the remainder of her memories. How likely is it? Well, not very, as it clogs up the narrative even further with a need to explain it. A quick mention to the idea that Mari is a clone of the original Mari, and as such doesn't realize Asuka is her daughter for that very reason. So Mari stands to Asuka exactly like Rei stands to Shinji. Okay, this feels like a bit of a desperate attempt to salvage the theory, which I'll say I still support. To stay on topic of far-fetched interpretations, I will bring up another scene. I had said that there is a second meaning to Asuka's name, so let's check this scene out. What we can see here is Mari simply staring at a flock of birds flying. Completely inconsequential and in fact quite a weird sequence, it is supposed to be foreboding and foreshadow what is going to happen to Asuka in Unit 3. But why bother? If you are familiar with the second meaning of Asuka's name, this scene gains slightly more significance, as that meaning is flying bird. I told you it was very far-fetched.